Hey, friends. Welcome to Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter on WGSN-DB, Going Solo Network Radio, Podcasts, and TV. I'm your host, Lisa Lisser, CEO and founder of LZL Coaching, a boutique coaching firm focused on divorce, relationships, and life transitions. I'm also a divorced mom of three now grown kids and a recovering lawyer, a current educator, a spiritual counselor, and a divorce coach. And I am committed to transforming the divorce experience for everyone involved. Now, when thinking about our life now, our life moving through divorce today, coupled with worries about our next chapter after divorce, our first questions very often are, how will I get through this? What will my future look like? How much will it cost? How will I be able to co parent with this person? Those issues about what we don't know can grow into emotional decision monsters. Our guest today, Justin Milrad, went through his own challenging divorce and came out with the vision to create his own divorce coaching practice, Reclaim and Reboot. And it led him to becoming an author and the visionary behind a process that can help you resolve your divorce quickly, the 3-day divorce, something he and I are working on together. Welcome, Justin.
Great to be here.
It's so great to have you, Justin. And you're really a rock star in lots of different ways. So you're a visionary entrepreneur, you're an author, you're a CDC certified divorce coach, and you help people transform pain into purpose after divorce. As the founder of Reclaim and Reboot, you guide clients through one of life's most emotionally and logistically complex transitions, offering the tools, the structure, and the support needed to reclaim identity, rebuild confidence, and reimagine life on the other side. So, in addition to divorce recovery, Justin also works as a relationship and career coach. And he also is the co founder and president of the Blue Dove Foundation, a nonprofit focused on mental health and Jewish values. He formerly served as CEO of the Berman Center, an outpatient mental health and addiction treatment facility, and he's held executive roles such as vice president of retail at Alternative Apparel and consulted with the Marcus Foundation and built multiple purpose-driven startups, including the Allergy Assist mobile app and Tikkun Olam Ventures LLC, a venture studio dedicated to doing good through innovation. Justin is really a self-starter, and his life experience helps people reconnect to their own purpose and their own life experience. And that's why he's found himself in this divorce and recovery space. So, Justin, again, welcome. And let's start talking about dishing on divorce next chapter.
Absolutely. Well, it's great to be here. And, this is a place I never thought I would be. My ex-wife and I, we were the couple that everyone wanted to be.
Wow.
And we had lots of good years. We have three beautiful kids, and everything was great until it wasn't. For us, we started and managed a business together, which was not easy. And I was warned by many people not to do that. But of course, we often think that we can, bypass, history and predictions. And it was kind of the start to our downfall. Add on that, COVID, three young kids, political unrest, and just life. And, our marriage started to unravel and fall apart. And we kind of went into it with the idea that it was going to be cordial and collaborative. And then the lawyers got involved.
Hmm.
And, kind of summarizing, after 3 years of fighting and spending seven figures, we are now fully divorced and we're getting along great as co-parents, which I think is the ultimate. But the whole process was awful, horrible, degrading, and really, knocked me off, the pedestal that I felt I was on for a period of time. Life was great until we went through a really contentious, horrible divorce. And that's really why I became a divorce coach. I didn't know such a thing existed until the tail end of my divorce. And after seeing a divorce coach, it kind of completely reframed my mindset as to what my future could look like and the comeback story that I can create. And it's not about getting even, and it's not about getting answers, and it's not about fixing the past, because the past is history, tomorrow's a mystery, and all we have
Mhm.
is the now. And I
Yeah,
think once I kind of came to that conclusion, I looked back at all the mistakes that I made, and getting to meet and talk to other divorce coaches, including you, Lisa. We often said there's a better way. So it was wonderful. You and I spent a lot of time talking about how divorce, the way it's set up in the courts and the attorneys and everything else, it's set up for war. But there's got to be a better way. And that's where the idea of the 3-day divorce came from.
right. So I didn't mention that yet, but yes, well, I guess I did. The 3-day divorce, it's our title, right? It is really important. But part of the journey is also recognizing that, for us at least, sometimes we had to hit bottom in order to recognize it was time to come up for air and do that recovery. So you and I both have in common that we work in the addiction recovery space, and we learned that there are tools outside of ourselves that can help us move forward. And that was something where years ago, you and I connected before we both became divorce coaches, because we have an inner spirit that wants to heal, that recognizes that no matter where we sit, there is another way. And how do we get to that other way? For me, it was in Jewish texts and spiritual counseling, and you had a Jewish recovery space too that you had launched. So our clients aren't necessarily Jewish. And in my case, what I have found is that my clients that aren't Jewish actually have more of a grasp of the biblical text that I sometimes talk about than my Jewish clients, because they're more in touch with the God side of their relationships. But all that being said, is how do we bring the spirit back into divorce? Is we need to be intentional, and we need to recognize that divorce doesn't have to be a war. And that's language that you used. But I know that in mine, I felt like it had to be, because I was fighting someone. And my marriage, which had been 21 years before the process started, and took 5 years of deliberating, do we get divorced or not? There's so much challenge there. But what would it look like if we could have come together and said, okay, now is the time for us to do this in peace instead of in war? And that's what 3-day divorce is about. So, with that as like a preface, tell our audience, like, what is your vision of what 3-day divorce can be? And, I'm on board and we are working together, but our audience doesn't know yet. So let's give them a taste of what that's about.
Absolutely. And, just to kind of piggyback on what you talked about, divorce is a type of recovery. And I think one of the big differences is typically in recovery, you have your people, you have your
Mhm.
meetings that you can go to, you have your support groups, you have your community. In divorce, for many people, it's very lonely and you're
Yeah.
by yourself. And that's why sometimes, when we have free time or we're looking for, revenge, our mind is overworking and over processing, when we should really be thinking about the future and how can we get out of the space we're in and set ourselves up for a great comeback.
Right. So if
And
I could just jump in for a minute, what you said is really essential, that in divorce, so much of the battle is about looking behind, looking at the past. Who needs to pay for what happened, or why they need to pay, or how much they need to pay. Whereas you and I are focused on looking at the future. Like, this is where we are now in the present, and our role is to use the present to create the best future.
Yep. And it's really about radical acceptance.
Hmm.
And once you accept that you are where you are and that things, you have a lot of agency in how things move forward, you can start making those decisions.
Yeah.
So the concept of the 3-day divorce is, what if we were going into this collaboratively and we identify what's most important, which typically is the kids, or are the kids, it's our freedom, it's respect for one another, and it's making sure that we continue to move forward in a positive way. And the kids are extraordinarily important, because no matter what, you will always have that connection and relationship. You're a
Mhm.
family still. You're shaped differently, but you're still a family. And a family that handles divorce well will have kids that thrive. And a
Mhm.
family that doesn't handle divorce well and gets into war, their kids will likely struggle.
So
So,
I'm going to interrupt one more time. And a family that stays married and continues to struggle will also have children who struggle. So the fear that we have of actually stepping into the divorce waters because we think, we'll stay married for the kids, we're not always benefiting the kids by staying married. So just to put that
it's
out there. Yeah.
it's very true. There's a great saying that I read recently: you should never marry someone that you're not capable of divorcing. And even though it's funny and hilarious, there's a lot of truth to that, because you want to know that if you're going to marry this person, if things go south one day, that it won't be a war. And a big part of the 3-day divorce is, committing to one another, your values that you have, and creating joint agreements, and collaborating to be able to get through these difficult discussions, and difficult agreements, and distribution of assets, and a plan going forward in a productive manner. And, in order to do so, you really need some ground rules. So, in the concept of the 3-day divorce, the only way that you'll be successful is if you commit and agree to these ground rules ahead of time.
Hmm.
So, in a conflict, A, B, and C will happen. you know and the vision of the 3-day divorce is that you walk out after 3 days with a memorandum of understanding, where 90 to 95% of all the issues are resolved, and the remaining 5 to 10% is really just about getting clarification from other professionals, so that you can resolve those issues.
Yeah.
So a big part of 3-day divorce is really, identifying values, creating agreements, ensuring there's clarity, mutual understanding, talking about the law, because ultimately the law dictates a lot of the decisions, and it varies based on what state you're in, whether you're in a equitable state or an equity state. And once all of that is laid out on on the table, you can have productive discussions.
Right. Right. And the idea behind 3-day divorce is that when you go in with a mindset that we are going to have a relationship after this because of the kids, so let's not harm each other on the way.
Yeah.
And doing the prep work, creating the commitments, having a structured approach. We talked about redesigning your operating system so that you're focused on the next chapter with a structure for communication, a structure for mindset, so that you can learn how to shift your mindset when you're triggered. And that's a big piece of it. Also recognizing that triggers are going to happen. Yes, we're going to go in with the mindset of 3 days, but let's prepare for if that could go sideways. because just because it's our vision doesn't mean that somehow we're not going to get off track. And that's not because you're doing anything wrong. That's because the nature of this is conflict. You're going to have conflict, but whether it turns into chaos, that's your choice.
And I'll say this from practicing and going through my own divorce, what I noticed is it takes people a good 5 years to move on. It impacts your identity. Your identity as a father, a mother, a husband, a
Mhm.
wife, a provider, and that is pretty big. So we spend a lot of time talking about acceptance
Yeah,
and closure and not always getting answers. We spend so much time. I'll talk about my own divorce, but I was ruminating in my head. I need apologies. I need answers. I need accountability. And then eventually, when I worked with my divorce coach, and they let me know that I may never get them, and that it's my choice whether I want to move on or not, that I
right.
have full agency to do that. That was a real turning point for me. And, I'll say with the 3-day divorce and with the support of a coach, you speed up the process really quickly. And, this morning I went for a coffee with a very well-known local divorce attorney. And, we were talking about divorce coaching, and, he kind of reflects back, and he said, I wish that divorce coaching was a thing years ago, because he really struggled working with some of his clients moving forward because there was so much anger and animosity and wanting to get even, and that he and his team, they weren't equipped with the tools. And while therapy is extraordinarily important, to get through the process, um, coaching focuses on the where you are now and where you want to go there and what it's going to take to get there and to have a plan. And when I look at the 5 year timeline for getting through divorce, and people that I built a relationship with, many of them didn't have a plan. They were on the hamster wheel, and every single day they were playing the victim of I'm a divorcee, rather than, this is transformational growth. And a certain percentage of my life is over, and I can make the next chapter the best one possible. And I can say for myself, even though we went through a really tough time, I still have a lot of great memories, with my ex, and I don't regret the time that we had together. But I'm now in a healthy relationship, and I've really focused on myself, and I'm loving life. And had I not had the opportunity to get off the hamster wheel and take a look at life, and then realize that I have a brand new canvas that I can paint, like, what a great opportunity. So,
Yeah. And what you just did is you rewrote the story, right? Like so many of my clients have a hard time um, getting out of the victim mindset. Like this happened to me. This continues to happen. He keeps on attacking me. How can I be my best self if he's not going to be his best self? And what I work with them on is helping them recognize that they get to decide how they want to show up. They have the agency, as you said, to make those choices. And the 3-day divorce mindset is a visionary mindset where you're looking at the future from where you stand right now. And you're not taking the time during these 3 days to spend time placing blame and accusations and shaming. And that is such a big part of divorce in America, the shaming and the blaming. And it's not even always the ex who's shaming and blaming you. It's very often you're shaming and blaming yourself. Like I thought I was different. I thought that I could make this marriage work. I failed because I didn't. And I work with people to help them see that it's not a fail, it's a learning. One of my coaches taught me there's no winning and losing. There's only winning and learning.
Yep.
And the 3-day divorce is taking that learning and jumpstarting it. And what we do afterwards, whether we have trainings afterwards. I do this 16-week co-parenting training called BEH2O. And that's about putting in the hours and the work to make these habits stick, right? You can't create a habit in 3 days, but you can create a mindset shift.
Yep.
But yeah.
The 3-day divorce in many ways is the master class
Hmm.
in how to do divorce right.
Yeah.
And, we also share, in addition to having some really great conversations, and because everyone's situation is unique, there are things out there that we know, and there is data out there, that we know, and we share that with the group so that they understand that, for example,
Oh, wait,
I shouldn't.
before
Yes.
you go there, let's take a quick break and then you'll share
Okay.
how we get the whole framework around using data to reframe our clients' mindsets. Okay, so with that, we're going to take a quick 30-second break and we'll be right back with Justin Milrad and the 3-day divorce. And we're back with Justin Milrad and the 3-day divorce. So, when we left for our break, Justin was going to share with us some tools that we use in terms of statistics and information that we share with our clients to help them wrap their head around the 3-day mindset. So, Justin, go right ahead.
All right, so I'm going to talk about co-parenting. So, for example, we share information about co-parenting, which is obviously extraordinarily important. So, some of the tips are keep the focus on the children. Ask yourself the question over and over again, is this best for my child? Because we have data that prove that children thrive when they feel safe, loved, and not caught in the middle.
And I'm
Um,
going to just jump in on that one. It's not just, is this best for my child, but how does this impact my child? Right? Like,
exactly.
we need to ask ourselves the questions so we get curious about our own behavior, because our instincts are actually clues to getting answers that we aren't necessarily asking ourselves. So go on, share some
A-
more.
Absolutely. So, another one is don't talk badly about the other parent, regardless of how you feel. And hopefully, over time, you can look and see that the other parent is trying their best. In most cases, that you shouldn't talk badly about them, and you shouldn't feed, your kids information that they don't need to know or that, isn't age appropriate. So, for example, if you have, an 8-year-old and your spouse cheated on you, that's not something that they need to know now. At some point, you probably want to have that conversation, but there's a way to do it in a productive manner, especially once you've moved on. Treating a relationship, if you're angry at each other, as a business relationship where you keep communication polite, neutral, and fact oriented. Honoring the other parent's time, also super important because at the end of the day, you want your kids to love both of you, and you're both super important to your kids. And, I heard a statistic recently that blew my mind, and it really put things into perspective that we spend between 90 and 95% of our time with our kids by the time they turn 18. So if you have a 50-50 custody agreement, that's cut in half. So you want to make sure that you are spending productive, joyful, memorable times with your kids and not letting the past, be the past and manifest itself, because it's not healthy for anybody. So those are some examples.
Yeah, and that's really about committing yourself to a mindset shift, to having an outward mindset that you're not staying in the box of the conflict and the fight and the victim mindset. That's what you know. But what we move people through in 3-Day Divorce is having an outward mindset. What's best for my kids? If I'm looking forward, what does that look like? And how do I do what's best for me? Because that actually is best for my kids. Like, what is the way I effectuate that change? And the 3-Day Divorce, resolving key issues in a 3-day intensive, which you have prepared for beforehand, because let's not pull false information out there. In our 3-day divorce process, we invite our clients to prepare, to do serious preparation and evaluation before they come to the table. Because if you're not prepared, if you're not, you're planning to fail. Like, failing to plan is planning to fail. I think that was Benjamin Franklin. But it's really about, how do we enter the process? And if we're going to enter the process with an open mindset, an outward mindset, we're going to be in a much better space than if we enter the process in a closed mindset, in the box thinking. And those are the people who are in the box may not be ready for the 3-day divorce. So it's a challenge out there to the divorcing community. Like, let's figure out how we can be in that process, because it's going to save you time, it's going to save you money, and it's going to save you emotional pain. And that's what we're all hoping to do, because if you have less emotional pain, your kids will have less emotional pain.
There's a great quote from George Eliot: "It's never too late to become what you might have been." And a big part of the 3-day divorce, and kind of getting through the pain and the anger and the regrets, is finding your purpose and focusing on what will give you meaning, purpose, and joy. And that's a big part of the process, because if you can't move forward, yes, you may complete a divorce, but you're going to be stuck in time.
Yeah.
And we want everybody, regardless of fault and contribution towards a divorce, to live a meaningful, happy life. And
Yes.
we know that two happy exes are good for themselves, but they're also good for the kids, and they're good for society.
Yeah.
So, while we do focus on the process and business of divorce as part of the 3-day divorce, we also spend an extraordinary amount of time about planning for the future and digging deep into who you are, so you can set yourself up for the greatest comeback story that you never thought was possible.
Right. That you never thought you'd have to write. But that's also because I think we go into marriage thinking that we're going to have a dream. And, that's a story, that's a fairy tale that we've all been told. Like, every rom com has this dream, and then at the end, they find each other. But we don't get to see what happens after they find each other. Right. And that's really where the story starts. At the end of the rom com, the end of that movie, that's the beginning. One of I wrote a chapter of a book called Divorce Decoded, and my quote was, "Every beginning is another beginning's end." So that's what we're looking for. We can close the door on the past. It doesn't mean we ignore it. It doesn't mean it didn't matter. What it means is we're ready to launch something else. And you learned things in the past. So let's take those learnings and that education about yourself and the questions you have about what happened, not placing all the blame on someone else, but seeing, I was in this relationship too. And so in our 3-day divorce, we do have sessions that are dedicated to getting our heads around where we were in the process and where we want to be now and how we want to look back on this 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because we're going to be different then. You know,
No doubt.
yeah,
One of my favorite analogies, that you and I have talked about is software versus hardware.
right.
So our body is a vessel, right? We're hardware. Our hands, our head, our eyes, our feet, that's all hardware. And then the software is, the mind, the spirit, the soul. And the mind, body, spirit, soul have to be in sync with one another. And, when you're going through this process, there are things that we need to do and understand. We all talk about self-care, which we all know is important, but it's a lot more than eating healthy foods and going for a run. It's understanding, where the benefits are and how can I reshape my mind, to think a little differently, and how do I take negativity and turn it into positivity. So, that's where we're all familiar with software upgrades, and that's what we're constantly doing. We're downloading an update.
Yeah,
Here's an update. I just learned this. Here's an update, and then our operating systems modify based off of what we know and what we learn, and then we
yeah,
show up as better versions of ourselves.
exactly. And that's integrating the science of neuroplasticity, that you can teach an old dog new tricks. You just need to practice them. And so it's about creating new pathways based on behaviors. And it's hard, but taking it little by little and step by step. Like, for instance, a prequel to our 3-day divorce is look at your budget. How much do you spend each month? What does it mean to you? What is it going to look like in the future, so that you actually start to practice doing the hard things? So many of my clients fight the taking stock part. Like, the hardest thing for lawyers is to get their clients to fill out the CIS, which is the case information statement in New Jersey. But not realizing that the CIS is actually the tool to launch you into your future. So you start recognizing what you really need and what you're really spending on and what's really most important. It puts you into purpose driven mode. And that's what 3-day divorce is. The people who engage with a 3-day divorce are purpose driven, because the shorter the process, um, the less damage on the sides.
Well, one of the things that brings extreme anxiety to anyone going through divorce is, can I afford to live? Money, it's important. And, part of this process and division is coming up with budgets and understanding that you may have to change, some of your lifestyle. And 3-day divorce helps you get these answers so that you find out that you're going to be okay. Or if you find out that there's a deficit, we can start putting a plan together of how do you fill that deficit, or what changes can you make. And I know we haven't yet spoken about the cost of divorce. If you're lucky, you can get divorced for about 20,000, $30,000 at the low end. But many divorces are in the 6 to 7 figure range. And we want to make sure that anyone that we work with can keep as much money in their own marital estate and for the kids and benefit of life, rather than paying it out to other professionals to get through the divorce. So a big benefit of the 3-day divorce is understanding the process, understanding who makes up your team and your partners, and how to best use them. I remember I called up my attorney once because I was frustrated with something the other side did, and it was all emotional. And my attorney said, I'm happy to listen to you, but I'm 3 to 4 times higher cost than your therapist. And, I know you have a support network and you can reach out to them too. And I really thought about it, and that made a lot of sense. So there is a lot of waste that can happen, in the process. So we help you better understand and identify how to spend it, smartly.
Right. It's about mindful spending and mindfully evaluating. This is the power of the pause. Before you call your 500 plus an hour lawyer, think about, are you working with a coach? Can a coach help you resolve some of those issues before you put them in front of your lawyer? And in 3-Day Divorce, can you find the tools to resolve it with the new operating system we've created to how you manage conflict? And that's really sort of the heart of what 3-Day Divorce is about. We prep you, we take you through a 3-day retreat, and we launch you with a memorandum of understanding so that the big issues are already on the table and you've reached some agreements. And that's the priority that Justin and I have in creating this concept of 3-day divorce. So with that in mind, keep your eyes open for our book and our retreat. And Justin, how can my audience get a hold of you?
So they're welcome to call or text my mobile phone at 404-353-5175, or they can set up a free 30-minute consultation, and they can go to www.reclaimandreboot.me. There's also workbooks and blogs and a lot of other information. You can get to me through Lisa. We do a lot of great work together. And I just wish everyone well on this journey. It doesn't have to be a horrible, awful process. In fact, it could be very eye-opening. And I guess the last thing I want to say is there is joy after divorce, and make sure that you put joy in the center of everything you do each and every day. Because while it's a painful chapter, you can come out stronger, and put yourself first. It's
Yeah.
super important.
Yeah. There's joy and there's gratitude. And having the right support is key to both of those things. And just, a last point, and I know I don't usually do a last point now, but one of the most positive divorce experiences my client had was in a situation where she was my client and her spouse was Justin's client. And together we walked them through the process so that they could resolve it as quickly and speedily as possible. And their papers are filed. And this is 3-4 months. So it's really exciting. This can happen. 3-4 months is not 3 days, but we didn't have that yet. So we're on it.
Yep.
With
And
that,
they're thriving, which is incredible because
yeah,
they started right and they stayed right.
yeah, yeah. And with that, I thank you all for listening to Dishing on Divorce Next Chapter. I'm Lisa Lisser. You can find me at lzlcoaching.com. I also offer free 30-minute consults, and you can email me, lisa@lzlcoaching.com. I'm looking forward to see you next time, 2 weeks from now, and next week on Dishing on Divorce. And with that, thank you, Justin, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everybody.